Hi friends, we at GLC would like to take a quick moment to thank you for watching our programs on this platform, and we'd like to ask you for a little favor. Would you please go beneath this video and click the subscribe button? Did you know that by simply subscribing to the GLC YouTube channel, you can help us financially support the programs on this platform? You'll need to be signed into YouTube beforehand, but if not, simply click the subscribe button and YouTube will automatically walk you through the steps to sign in or to create an account. By taking these simple steps, you will not only ensure that you continue to receive our unique programming and gain instant access to the hundreds of videos we post, but more importantly, you'll also be telling YouTube that GLC's content is worth watching and promoting. Likewise, if you enjoyed a specific program, please click the thumbs up button below, which also helps inform YouTube that this is a program worth recommending. Finally, once you have logged in and subscribed, please click the notification bell below in order to receive announcements when we post new content. As usual, feel free to post your questions and comments in the comments section below. We always love hearing from our friends and viewers. Again, thank you for watching and supporting God's Learning Channel. We couldn't spread the message of the gospel without you. Be blessed, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Well, shalom, shalom, and welcome back to the end declared right out of the beginning. I'm Brad Scott, and you're not, and that's probably good for you. In some of the past programs, we have been talking about words mean things. I'm hoping that we've been able to see that our Bible is filled with words, that our sovereign God from the very beginning chose to reveal His Word with words. And we ought to know, especially if we're going to be teachers in this world, we ought to know what the words mean. And I've been trying to give examples to this beautiful language that I believe all of the Bible was originally written in, and taking these words back to what they meant when they first started, back to the beginning. Hence the name of this program, The End Revealed Out of the Beginning, which comes from Isaiah chapter 46, verse 10. We've also talked about the difference in the thought patterns in the past, the difference between Western thinking, Western Greek kind of Hellenistic type thought processes, as opposed to the thinking process of those who wrote the Scriptures. And we've talked about the difference between organic evolution and so forth, and theological evolution, as opposed to creation thinking, which is what the Bible is all about. And so, once again, we are going to go into another field here. We're going to deal more with things that are going on in the end. Most of us listening to me right now, most of us realize that we are living in precarious times. I think all of us sense that. I think people who don't even necessarily believe in God sense that these are very precarious times that we live in. And so, because of prophecy, we are already told in the Scriptures the things that are going to be occurring in the end. As a matter of fact, Revelation 19 verse 10 says that the testimony of Yeshua is the spirit of prophecy. And so, based once again on what Isaiah said, and he said it not once, but he said it 6 other times, something to the effect of what's kind of summed up in Isaiah 46:10, and that is, once again, Magid Mereshit Akrit, and that is that God declares the end right out of the beginning. So I submit to you, as we keep approaching what seems to be these end times to most of us, where is our understanding and our insight of the end going to be located according to the Scriptures? Right out of the beginning. And so I submit to you that, especially the red words of the New Testament, and we all know where those come from, all the parables that Yeshua told, which are a culmination of all the prophecies that are wrapped up in parables. Yeshua takes the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah, Daniel, and Zechariah, and so forth, and he wraps these things up around the parables in the New Testament. And he's the one that told us in the parable of the sower, the parable of the 4 soils. All of you are familiar with this parable. He's the one that told us through Luke that the meaning of the parable was the seed is the word of God. And then in Mark's version, he told us that if you understand this parable, what's the parable about? seeds, planting, harvesting, reaping, agricultural things that were the first things revealed to us in the scriptures. Guess where? In the beginning, the opening chapter of Bereshit, or Genesis. And so he said, if you understand this parable, you will understand all parables. And the parables are the testimony of Yeshua, the spirit of prophecy, and they're all wrapping up all the prophecies in the Old Testament. And so what we're going to spend these next few programs doing is taking some of the things, especially some of the more well-known verses, particularly a couple in the book of Revelation, and we're going to take them back to the beginning and see how the Father has already identified for us the things that are said in the end. And we all understand the book of Revelation, Hit Galutz in the Hebrew, which technically, Hit Galutz, is the Hebrew concept of the exiles. Galutz is the basis for the Hebrew word for the book of the Revelation. It's the very first. When you read your book of Revelation in Hebrew, and I submit to you that if you go to the bookstore here at GLC, they have some Hebrew English Bibles that you can get. And I would suggest that you go get them, because what they are is the Old Testament. Now, we all know we have the Old Testament in Hebrew, but they have the New Testament written in Hebrew as well. And if you turn to the book of the Revelation and you read it in Hebrew, the very first word that you will read in Hebrew is Hit Galutz, which is translated as the revelation in English. But the word galut there is directly related to galah, which in Hebrew means to reveal something. And it's also the basis, believe it or not, and I think maybe we've discussed this before, it's the basis for Psalm 23 verse 3 as well. And that is when David is praying and he says, lead me in your cycles of righteousness. In Hebrew, the concept, you know, the language your Bible is written in and the people who wrote it, in this beautiful language, all words that have a G and an L in it, a Gimel and a Lamed, have something to do with rolling something over. I think we talked about this in the past, and maybe we didn't, so I'll just talk about it for a few minutes. All words in Hebrew that have a G and an L in it have something to do with rolling something over. It's a beautiful primitive picture of someone walking through a field and seeing a rock. Some of you have probably done this in your life. You're walking through a field and you see a rock out there, and you pick up the rock and you roll it over. See, all the pin-headed theology of our modern religions is all found embedded in the beginning in simple things like this, my friends. I know I've told you this before, but I'm going to keep saying it until we all grasp the fact that that's what the Father's doing in the last days, is bringing us back to the simplicity of the beginning. Because pointy-headed intellectualism has turned concrete, simplistic things in the Bible into systematic, theological, abstract, invisible concepts. And that's why we all argue and fuss with each other all the time. The Father takes them back to the simplicity of things that you and I do every day. So you're walking through a field and you roll over the rock. And when you roll that rock over, you reveal or you expose what was previously hidden. And that's the picture that's being drawn here. You have a rock, and what's underneath it has not been revealed. It's been concealed. It's very much there. It's just when we roll it over, now we expose what's underneath it. And so that's why the word G and L in Hebrew is the word for galut, the exiles, the diaspora, the scattering of the house of Israel throughout all the nations. We call that the galut because they're exposed. The idea of exile means they're exposed. They're out from under God's cultivated protection, and because they sinned, He scattered them throughout the world where they're exposed to all the same elements that the tares in the field are exposed to. And you'll get my justice of that as we go on in this program. And so it also happens to be the same two letters that is the Hebrew word for galah, or to reveal. It happens to be the same two letters. It's at the very heart of the word Megillah, which in Hebrew is a scroll. A scroll. See, because you take a scroll and you roll it up and you unroll it. And so it has the G and the L in it. When you go to Israel, notice how many towns in Israel have a G and an L in it, like the Galilee. for example, or Golan Heights, or Gilgal, and I could go on and on. These are beautiful letters, but they also happen to be the basis for the Hebrew concept of cycle, to make a cycle. That's why David says in Psalm 23:3, lead me in your cycles of righteousness, not the King James linear thought process, the Darwinistic evolutionary thought process that Western religions do with it. He's saying lead because there's perfectly good words in Hebrew for paths. Hebrew has words for a straight path. There's several of them, but that's not the word that's used here, and it's done on purpose. It's our goal. It's an ayin gimel lamed, and the purpose is to show something that rolls and so forth, and that's the meaning of the word. And so therefore, any word in Hebrew that has the G and the L in it, especially when they're together, is going to have some nuance of cycle or roll. It's the Hebrew word for waves of the sea as well, because when you go to the sea, particularly a large body of water, if you've ever been to the Mediterranean or the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean, the waves roll in on the shore. And so this is the basis for these cycles and so forth. And you can continue to see these things. So that's the reason why all these things are wrapped up in the book of the Revelation. Because not only does it mean to reveal, but it's also pointing you toward the fact that this book is all about the gathering of the exiles that are scattered throughout all the earth. The final fulfillment, if you will, of the prophecies of the scattering of Israel throughout all the earth. And so truly, the end is revealed right out of the beginning, just like Isaiah says. And the other thing I want to remind you of is, once again, that all of God's desire, will, purpose, all the revealing of his essence, and even prophecy throughout all the scripture is all found embedded in the first 4 chapters of Bereshit. If you can understand those first 4, the beginning, you will begin to understand the end. Because many of us find ourselves going to the middle, or going to the end to understand the end, going to the middle to understand the end. That's what most prophetic teachers do. When they teach prophecy, they take you to Jeremiah and Zechariah and Daniel. They go to the middle, if you will. And how many go to the very beginning in order to understand the end? So these next few programs, we're going to talk about a very central character in the scriptures by the name of Esau. I'm going to propose to you right off the bat that you and I, as the worshipers of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that is our God. He is the God of Israel, and he consistently is referred to as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That is not a coincidence, because that is a beautiful picture of the produce of the forced soil producing fruit 160 and 30-fold. Because when you go back to the beginning, did you notice that in the parable of the sower? That when we get to the forced soil, this is the soil that produces the good fruit, in which the seed produces. The first 3 soils, and we're going to talk about this in this next few programs, the first 3 soils are already identified for you in the model of Cain, Ishmael, and Esau. And there is a God of Cain, Ishmael, and Esau that we're talking about, as opposed to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, or Jacob. And so when we get to the forced soil, it says that the fruit that's produced from that will be produced 160 and 30-fold. Well, why did they say 160 and 30? Why did they not say it the way it would usually be said, and that would be produce fruit 30, 60, 100-fold, which the Gospel of Mark does do. But Matthew doesn't do it that way. Matthew, Matthew in Hebrew, who presents the Messiah, Yeshua, from the position of Judah, from the position of a kingdom or a king, some of you are familiar with this, he says 160 and 30. I'm going to submit to you because Paul tells us that if ye are messiahs, and we're going to put this up on the screen in the next couple of episodes, but he says if you be messiahs, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. Now, that's something that Paul says about you and me. He says it to the Galatians. Did you notice Galatians, G and the L? We won't go into that right now. We'll save that for another time. But Galatians also has the G and the L in it. And so he's speaking ostensibly to the Gentiles in Galatia, and he tells them, these new believers, if you are Messiahs, now how long has the Messiah been around? John tells us from the beginning that Yeshua's been from the beginning, not the middle. Yeshua didn't come on the scene in Matthew 1:1, and the church didn't come on the scene in Acts chapter 2. Apostles didn't start in the New Testament. All these things we talked about in past programs, when we take them back through the Greek, into the Hebrew, back to the mountaintop, back to the beginning, we realize that all these things were already prophesied right out of the beginning. And why did the Father put them in the beginning? Because of John 3:16. Because he loves the whole world. And because the Father loves the whole world, he put all the truth, all his insight, all his prophecy, all the revealing of his nature and his will and his purpose in the beginning, not the middle, not halfway, but he's revealed these things from the very beginning. And so Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when you go back and you read the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which you should do when you read these things in the New Testament, go back and see where Paul is drawing from, and then you will understand what Paul was saying to the Galatians. You'll realize that the scriptures reveal to us the ages of those three when they produced their fruit. They were 100, Abraham, 60, Isaac, and then Jacob, the one that represents Jacob is Joseph, house of Joseph, representing the house of Israel. The Bible tells us that when he produced his fruit, his seed, fruit, he was 30 years old. The exact same age that Yeshua was when he started his ministry and produced his fruit, if you will, at 30 years old. And so the fruit, the fourth soil that produces the fruit is the one that produces the fruit of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because if you are Messiahs, then you are Abraham's seed. So there's more to that than just some sort of poetic device to give us good fuzzy feelings about who we are in Messiah. The Yeshua is trying to tell us something so intimate and so personal of you and me in the parable of the sower. And we're going to dig into that a little deeper here, a little further. I guess I would have to say pun intended with that. In the book of Hosea, as a matter of fact, let me read this to you. In the book of Hosea, chapter 14, verses 1 and 2. Hosea, chapter 14, verses 1 and 2. If we ever find it here. Got the real skinny Bibles. Hosea 14, verse 1 and 2. The Father prophesying, knowing that in the end of times, he was going to bring his scattered people back into the land. Now, let me set up this scenario for a moment. The prophecies state in all of the major and what we ostensibly call the major and the minor prophets that God's people Israel divided into the house of Israel and the house of Judah, and they were scattered all over the nations. And the prophecy, without going into detail on this, because this is not time to do it, was that in the latter days he would bring them back into the land. But the prophecy also says that when my people, who Yeshua in the New Testament calls the lost sheep of the house of Israel, when I bring them back to the land, there's going to be a multitude of Gentiles, that would be you and me, who will join themselves with them, and they will be one tree in my hand, one flock with one shepherd. Now that's what Ezekiel chapter 37 says. That's what the prophecies of Hosea says. That's what the New Testament says. That's what Yeshua says in John chapter 10. And speaking of his death and resurrection on the tree, he says the purpose of that in John chapter 10 was to make of two one fold with one shepherd. And so the image that's given in Ezekiel is two sticks, but the word stick in Hebrew is eitz. It's a tree. Remember in the past we've talked about the fact that that's also the root of the Hebrew word for counsel. Etzah is the Hebrew word for counsel, but the root of it is a tree, because you and I either get our counsel from the tree of life or we get our counsel from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's the fruit we will produce. And so the prophecies are very clear that there will be a multitude. Even Isaiah alludes to the fact that there will be more of the unmarried wife than there will be of the married wife when this happens. And that he's going to have to take the stakes of his tent. Remember what tent means in Hebrew. To pitch a tent is the basis of the Hebrew word for grace. So he's even going to have to take the stakes of his tent and he's going to have to widen them out in order to fit all of these multitudes of believers of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whether they're Jew or Gentile, Dan, Reuben, Simeon, Australian, doesn't make any difference. A believer is a believer is a believer is a believer. And the latter days is going to have to enlarge the stakes of his tent in order to fit everybody in these latter days as they come back into the land. And so all these prophecies surround the regathering of God's people in the latter days. But the Father couldn't in the beginning, when this started to happen with Yeshua's death and resurrection, because that's when the restoration of all things began. Remember, Yeshua said that John the Baptist, if you can receive it, John the Baptist is Elijah. And Elijah's ministry was to restore all things. Two things are right in our face about Elijah's ministry. Two things. Number one, he was to prepare the way for the Lord. That's in Malachi. That's also in Isaiah. He was to prepare the way for the Lord. And in preparation for the Lord, he is going to restore all things. And so Yeshua in the first century tells us, if you can receive it, alluding to the possibility that perhaps some people won't receive it, but if you can receive it, Yochanan the Immerser, or John the Baptizer, was Elijah. So just using good old down-home country common sense, what is he saying? He's saying that the restoration of all things has already begun. But see, we worship a God who's much smarter than we are. And he knows that you could not just walk up to new believers in the first century and say, okay, tomorrow at 3:30, I want you guys to all head back to the land. Okay? He couldn't say that. But knowing how we are, knowing how we operate, which is we have a spirit, there's a soulish part of us, the thinking part of us, and then there's our body, the way we behave. Knowing that in order to get someone to behave a certain way, you have to first get them to think a certain way. That's why Paul said in the book of Philippians, let this mind be in you that was in the Messiah Yeshua. That's what he said. Let this mind be in you. We've talked about this before. What kind of mind did the Messiah have? Was it a Presbyterian mind? Was it a mind from the Dallas Theological Seminary? Was it a Baptist mind? No, he was a Hebrew. And he thought like a Hebrew, he dealt like a Hebrew, he walked like a Hebrew. And so the Father knows that the only way I'm going to get you to behave like the Messiah, and I would think we would all agree with that, the only way we can get us to behave like the Messiah is to first get us to think like the Messiah. In order to get us to think like the Messiah, the Father first has to have our heart. This is exactly the way the tabernacle in the wilderness was designed as well. That's why it has that most holy place, and it has a holy place, and it has an outer court. And that's why the Father does things through believers, through the pattern of the tabernacle, first starting in the holy place and working his way out to the courts, knowing that in order to get me to behave a certain way, the court, my court, if you will, the part of the tabernacle that everybody sees. You can be a Gentile or an unbeliever or an enemy of Israel and just get up on a high mountain and you can look down into the tabernacle and you can see the court. You can see the linen curtains and so forth surrounding court. So everybody can see that part. What you can't see is in, if you will, the heart of the court, which is divided into two things, a most holy place and a holy place. And when the Father deals with those who don't know him, he starts in the court and works his way into the most holy place. So that's why faith cometh by hearing. It's your ears hanging on the outside of your head. And then your mind begins to receive what you're listening to if you have what we call an open mind and are willing to listen. And then once your mind is made up about something, now the Father has a way, by your permission, if you will, for him to come in and dwell in your heart, your most holy place. And so once he's set up, if you will, shop in your most holy place, now he deals with the believer from the most holy place outward. In other words, he starts in here in your spirit, and then he changes your mind about what is right and wrong, good and bad, holy and unholy, righteous and unrighteous. And then once you've changed your mind about what God says, not what I say, or a religion says, or my organization says, or my pastor says, or whatever, but what he says, now your behavior begins to change. And so the Father knows that's exactly how people operate. And so he knew in the first century, just after Yeshua's resurrection, that as he begins to regather and draw these people back who were scattered all over the earth. See, because they were scattered all over the earth, the disciples come to him in Acts chapter 1 and they say, when is the kingdom going to be restored to Israel? That's what they asked Yeshua. And what does Yeshua say? Well, that's not for you to know. He says, but first, the Holy Spirit's going to come upon you, and he's going to send you into Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. Now, notice the way he said that. I'm going to send you to Jerusalem and Judea. That's the house of Judah. Jerusalem, Judea. That's the hint. Okay? That's the house of Judah. Then I'm going to send you to Samaria, which was the capital of the house of Israel when they were divided in the days of Solomon, and to the uttermost parts of the earth where he scattered the house of Israel. So Samaria and the uttermost parts of the earth, house of Israel. Judea, Jerusalem and Judea, house of Judah. There's the only two people that are in the covenant. The new covenant, according to Yirmiyahu chapter 31, verse 31, repeated in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 8, is with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And the prophecies are very simple. We don't have to make up terms for them. We don't have to come up with these catchy little titles. I don't care whether you're one house, two house, no house, outhouse. I don't care what kind of house you are. We just want to follow what the scriptures say. And the scriptures are very simple, that he's going to bring them back into the land. But he's going to have to get their hearts first. He can't start with their behavior. He has to gather their hearts. And I submit to you, for 2,000 years, the Father has been gathering hearts first. Then he will change our mind. Then, subsequently, we will go back eventually to the land. So, until we meet again, cling to your roots that your days may be long and that you will prosper in everything you set your hand to do. See you next time. Shalom.